Welcome to Coaching in Session,
where limits end and growth begins.
Hosted by Michael Reardon.
This is your space to challenge the ordinary,
unlock your potential,
and step boldly into your next chapter.
Your mindset journey continues.
Welcome, Tom Cronin to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you. It's nice and early today. It's 6 a.m. here, so I'm just starting my day, which is a really nice time for me to be up.
All right. I love speaking with people from all parts of the world because it can bring about a different perspective, a different mindset, because the world that you're living in is very different than the culture here in America, especially here in Texas, in the Austin area. And I just love to get different views and walks of life, because sometimes when we are living in our neighborhoods, our communities, we can become one tracked, where we just focus on what is going on in our day-to-day basis. And we don't necessarily see the world for how vast and how expansive it is. And the work that you do as an author, speaker, and coach, and also a meditation teacher, is helping people understand not only their mind, but all of the possibilities that are available to them at different given times. Because the mind is going to evolve. Sometimes it can, expand to something greater, and sometimes it can contract, and it can be very small. And to learn how to open it up and to become refreshed again, and to see ourselves in the whole picture of our capabilities and our potential can lead to truly amazing things. But if you could, Tom, can you tell the world who you are, what you do, and of course, how you help people?
Thank you. I love what you're saying there, which I'm hoping we'll expand on a little bit more soon in the conversation. So I'm in Sydney, Australia, and I'm a meditation teacher and a retreat host, like you said, and a coach and also author, and produced a film called The Portal. And I was previously in my life a broker on a trading room floor, very much Wolf of Wall Street. So I was there for 26 years. I started the same year as Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street. And, I was on a crazy, wild trading room floor. It was late 80s, early 90s. It was reckless abandon. It was the wild west of finance markets. There was no HR or no, people and culture, and no sort of regulation and authorities sort of looking down on us. So it was kind of out of control times. And I got swept along by that culture. I got really involved. Like you said, my microcosm of my world was that there's just all this money, and we just do crazy things, and we work hard, and we burn the candle at both ends, we party hard. But over time, what happened was I got these spells of anxiety, and this sort of exacerbated into really severe panic attacks. I was doing a lot of drugs and drinking and no sleep, and it was really catching up on me. And then eventually I slipped into a really dark depression and eventually a nervous breakdown at the age of 29. And this was a really big turning point for me. It was actually when I found meditation. And then that led me down deep into spirituality, Eastern philosophy, studying all the religions and meditations in the world. And eventually I left that career in finance to become a teacher and a coach of what I'm doing now. So my work is to really help people realize that suffering is a catalyst for change. It's a cue for evolution, and it's a cue for adaptation. And if we ignore it, the suffering will just get worse. And I see a lot of suffering in the world because we're ignoring the cues for adaptation. And that's the challenge for humanity, is that we need to evolve very quickly.
I love the idea that suffering is a catalyst for change. Because if a person was living a wonderful life and everything was going their way, they would necessarily have no reason to change. They would have no reason to look beyond themselves, to learn different methods like meditation, or to maybe even change any aspect of their lifestyle, whether it be physical fitness, mental fortitude. We can go down the list of the things that they could begin to change. Because I am definitely one to say that if something is going well, you can always be looking around the corner for something to go wrong, or you can say, let me appreciate this wellness right now, because life is going to have a series of ups and downs. And most people don't make changes until they get to those downs, when they're like, wow, like this does not feel good. And rightfully so. We don't want you to get to a real low spot and say, oh, I'm so happy to be here, right? But it is an opportunity for people to say, let me expand, let me grow. And one of the questions I wanted to ask is, why are people so readily willing to change in a hardship or a trauma, rather than maybe doing so in a way that is going to be beneficial if they know that life can always be expanded upon and made better?
Yeah, it's a great question. I pondered this myself a lot. If it ain't broke, we don't fix it. So we just kind of keep doing. And I say to people, if life is going well, do whatever you're doing that has led to life being well. Keep doing that, because that's ultimately what we want. We want life to be well. But interestingly, one thing we know is that nothing will ever stay the same. And that therefore, whatever is going well for you, something will disrupt that at some point. And I'll give you an example. I had one gentleman who contacted me, and he wasn't Australian, but he was living in the Amalfi Coast in Italy, which is this most prestigious, beautiful area in Italy. And he'd sold his business in Australia for $350 million. And he was never going to be able to spend that money in his life if he tried. And he gave it a good nudge, though. He bought a $50 million palatial mansion in Italy, looking over the ocean there, the Mediterranean Sea. He had 5 of his favorite luxury cars in the garage. He had butlers, chefs, maids, cleaners, cooks. And he had a beautiful wife, 3 kids. Everything was the pinnacle of the human experience when it comes to what most people are aspiring to. And he contacted me and said, after a friend of his said, I think you should talk to Tom. He said, I don't understand. This is where I'm at now. This is my life. However, I've never felt so anxious, so depressed, and even so angry than I've ever felt before. And I just don't understand why. What's going wrong? I've done everything that I felt I should do. And it was that, again, like you said, everything had been going well, but at some point that completion rate of doing what you're supposed to do gets to an end. And then where do you go from there? Because you have to keep going, right? You don't just stop. There's no end. Then there's certainly no end to evolution. It's an ongoing process. So we never really arrived, but he thought he'd arrived, and that's the problem. And I said, well, look, you've covered everything in the external world. Good on you. You get a tick. Well done. However, have you covered everything on the inner world? And from there, I said, it's time to now start going inward. So he came and did my meditation course. He came and did my retreats. He did some mentoring. And we started to help him realize that it's not just about external accomplishments, which is where most of the world is focused. We have to have internal world accomplishments as well. We have to master the mind. We have to master our heart. We have to master our traumas, our wounds, our all of our sufferings that we've got on the inner world, and start to heal those and start to realize our true nature, which is beyond the mind and beyond the heart and beyond the intellect and beyond the body as well.
I think of movies as an example, and I think this could be a great segue, where if a movie ends and there's no sequel, people just get to the happy ending, right? Everything worked out for most movies, right? Think of Rocky. We can think of The Secret, movies like that. Like the movie has an ending that is like, wow, that was a good movie. But we don't see the lives of those characters when the lights are off, the screen is done, right? The movie's over, right? Because we know that they're going to have more ups and downs, but we can only live off that high. Like, wow, that's perfect, right? And then we start to compare. Well, my life is not perfect. It's not like that yet. And we might get to that point, but we don't realize that our movie's still going, it's still playing. And so we get to that good moment, that happy ending, and then eventually the movie's still playing, and we're just like, wait, there's a sequel, or there's another chapter that I have to worry about. And I just see that how many people, they get into this crisis of the next chapter or the next season of life, and it's almost like they're caught blindsided. How can people prepare for different aspects of their life, whether it be from different seasons, from ages, or maybe even just lifestyles?
So true. I love what you're saying, and I love the analogy of that, because we see them walking off into the sunset holding hands, but then their mum's going to get sick. One of them might get Parkinson's. Their kid's going to end up getting bullied at school. Like we didn't know the rest of the story, right? And that's exactly what happened with this gentleman. We could have ended the film with him buying his mansion, bringing his wife and kids over and setting it all up. And then that's the end of the movie. It's like, yes, he made it. But then if we saw the sequel, then, well, hang on, he's about to commit suicide because he's so depressed and anxious. So that wasn't in the movie. We didn't see that part. So the way we can avoid that is in the Vedic worldview. So I've studied the Vedas, a deep body of science of life. And we recognize that there are 3 moving parts to evolution. There's the creative operator. It's also known as Brahma. The maintenance operator, also known as Vishnu, and then the destructive operator known as Shiva. And these are the three, levers of evolution that are constantly moving in all of our lives, individually, collectively, as a business, as a relationship. So what that means is that we want to be in Brahma dominant mode. That's creative operator. That's adaptive, growing, evolving, learning, constantly progressing, inner world and outer world. We will need some time of maintenance. That's where we maintain a new level, a new status quo, and we sort of establish this new paradigm. Like, we've just moved to Italy, we've just bought the mansion. Let's just pause and enjoy it for a while. Like you said, just pause and be grateful and enjoy this wonderful experience. The analogy I like to use is Apple when they bring out the new iPhone. That's Brahma dominant. They've created something new. Then we maintain that for a period of time. That's Vishnu. But if we maintain for too long, then we're defying evolution. That means we're trying to hold on to a status quo and not allowing that current status quo to evolve. And so at some point, if they don't bring out a new iPhone, the competitors will continue to produce new developed and new progressive ways of producing phones, and they're going to lag and the business is going to collapse like Kodak did with the celluloid market. And so then we go into Shiva. Shiva is the destructive operator. And this is the thing that comes in when we talk about crisis. Shiva is the destructive operator that will start to create pain and suffering. It will be disease, it will be turmoil, it will be conflict, it will be something that is discord and something that is not harmonious. And this is the cue for progressive change. It's the cue to tune in. What is this guidance system trying to tell me that I need to do to alleviate this pain and suffering? And I'll give you an example. I went to get a medical the other day. I'm 58, so I thought I'd go to the doctors and just see where I'm at with everything. And he said, wow, everything's great, because you're working out, you're eating well, but your cholesterol's pretty high here. And we really need to check on that. And so he said, look, this is where it's at. And it was actually quite high. I was quite surprised. And so now that information hasn't led to a crisis yet. Okay, it hasn't led to a heart attack or heart disease or something. But there's enough information for me to start making changes. So I'm moving from Shiva. Well, I'm actually not in Shiva yet because there's not chaos yet. I'm in Vishnu. And I got a cue from the doctor that there's some information here that can avoid Shiva, but I need to adapt now. So I've cut back on my butter and my cheeses and my creams, and damn, I don't mind the odd pizza now and then. So I'm going to have to cut back on those. And so, this is about me moving from Vishnu to Brahma, from maintenance to creation or adaptation to avoid Shiva. But what happens with humans is that we're so resistant to change. As Darwin said, the strongest of the species is the most adaptive. But we're not very adaptive. And that's why we see species decline so many times in the history of civilization, because of our lack of adaptive capacity. And we're seeing it right now. There's a high probability we as a collective species may possibly eradicate ourselves because we're just simply lacking in adaptive capacity.
Yeah, I can see that happening so readily. And it's astounding how if people can see that for themselves and they still kind of walk to the light of that disaster, it shows that we have a lot of work to do, from a mindset point, from a people point, from society point, cultural point, to an evolution point, right? We have developed to the mindsets that we are today, and society has played a role and will continue to play a role in the next 50 to 100 years. And this is going to be a pivotal point for many people. And I know when we start to look at ways that we can help the mind begin to focus on the things that need to get changed, we can adapt more readily. Very similar to how you were given some news from the doctor. You can say, well, I can use this to my benefit. Yeah, sure. The bad news of me having high cholesterol is not what I want to hear when I go to the doctor, but I'm also the solution where I can fix this, where someone might have gotten this information from the doctor and they say, oh, I can't believe this. I'm going to be just like my father. I'm going to be just like my mother. I'm going to be just like my grandfather, or something along these lines, right? Where you just say that this is your fate, where you're doomed because you don't even want to take any deliberate action there. And I just think it's interesting, to say the least, how we're so quick to just, fall over and, go on our backs and kind of say, okay, let me just look at the sky and let life pass me by. And this happens so readily where, people, they can't move as well anymore. Their knees start to hurt, their back starts to hurt. And they go, well, instead of me feeling the pain or going through any suffering to feel better, I'm just going to sit here. And that's one of the worst things that we can do as the mind, or as for the body. The body is naturally always vibrating and moving. And the moment you just kind of hunker down and don't move, we start to break apart things in the body that should be moving that are no longer moving. Think of it in a way of like a river. Once it was flowing and everything is going to be nice, but then once you put a dam there, all the soot and all the things that would once just naturally progress through that river are going to be stuck on that dam. And if you ever seen a dam open after so many years, you just see the dirt and the debris. You're like, that's not water, right? And you have to ask yourself, why do people get into this lifestyle of allowing things to become so stagnant? And I think it's very reminiscent of what meditation is. And I remember early on when I started meditation in my 20s, it was very much like you have a thought that's like a leaf on the river, and you allow that leaf to just pass you by. You're not looking at the leaf, you're not chasing the leaf, because there's always a new leaf that's coming. There's always a new thought that's coming. And we get so fixated on things, our problems. We might be looking for quick solutions. Like, we love quick fixes as people. We want things simple. If you had high blood pressure or you have high cholesterol, you know what most people would do or say? Hey, doctor, just give me some medicine for this. Versus, let me do the work to remedy the situation. Let me create a schedule so we can open up the damn walls or valves so we don't have all that debris. We can always have clean water when we are seeing that dam release. Versus, we have been holding so much back. And this is what happens, I think, with so many people. They just hold so much back until that breaking point, until that tipping point, and then all mayhem ensues per se. And I just think of, if a person could change how they were thinking, very similar to how you thought, this is an opportunity rather than this is a death sentence. What are ways that meditation has helped you get into that mindset where you can start to look at things as they're coming to you rather than stopping things, saying, I don't want this, and putting it in a corner?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We have to understand the nature of the mind. It has two aspects to it. Most people think the mind is just thinking, but there's two components to the mind. We have thinking mind, which is your habitual patterns of neurological behavior. That is, tendencies for you to have certain thoughts on a daily basis. And if anyone was to do an audit or a spreadsheet of their daily thoughts, we have around 40 to 50, some people say 60, 70,000 thoughts a day. And so if we were to do a spreadsheet of all those thoughts, we would find that there's a lot of repetition. Did I pay my electricity bill? I don't have enough money. I'm no good. I'm unworthy, or I'm better than everyone else. Whatever their thoughts are, we've got these recurring tendencies, and these are called vasanas. And it's like you said in the opening of the call, the podcast, which I really appreciated, is that we tend to live quite small in this microcosm of our immediate community. So if your community is right-wing Christian family, then that's going to be a big part of the way you habitually will think. Or if you went to a very rough school and you got this sort of sense that you're no good, or you're one of the poor kids, or you're downtrodden, then that will be your tendency to think that particular way. So we have these patterns based upon our community, based upon our ancestry, based upon our political persuasions of our family, the sports team our dad followed. All these sorts of things are influencing the way we think. This is called vasanas, tendencies of your mind. Now, we also have conscious mind, which is the field of mind, the awareness that isn't a thought, but the awareness that is witnessing the thinking. We call this sakshikutashta, the silent witness. Others will call it presence, or some will call it consciousness itself. And the analogy I like to use is that my phone has an operating system within it. That's the iOS. I've got an iPhone. So it's the operating system within it, which is the capacity for that intelligence within the phone to do certain things. And that's the calculator, the camera, and the calendar, and all that sort of stuff that's programmed into the phone. But the great use of my phone is not what's in the phone. It's the great use of my phone is what's around the phone. Okay. And that's the vast field of information, that my phone is a vehicle to access that information. That's the World Wide Web of information. And it's almost an infinite supply of intelligence. So my phone is able to be a receiver of that information. And so our mind can be what's in the mind, that's vasanas. But when we meditate, we transcend the thinking mind. I do Vedic meditation or transcendental meditation. So this is not meditation where we're getting Matthew McConaughey to read your bedtime stories in the car mat. This is where we've gone deeper into no thought, but I'm awake. So now I'm in conscious field of mind, and this is the field of wisdom. This is the field of knowledge. And in Sanskrit, we call this the Sangita, the knower knowing the known. I now become the knower knowing the known. I am the knower, unpersonified knowing. In the personification, which is I'm the knower, in the process of knowing that which is already known, all wisdom is already there. And I'm now transcending my dogma, conditioning, my programming, my constructs of my immediate small environment of society and my vasanas, my tendencies to think in a particular way. And I'm experiencing the field of mind, which is the conscious awareness that is all wisdom, all knowledge, all potentiality, all creativity in that transcended, unmanifest experience. And then from that, I bring that into my mind and I start to let my mind be the conduit and the operator for that field and from that field. So this is how we start to have more adaptive capacity. We start looking at our thoughts and go, hey, dude, why are you having those thoughts? And this is where we're seeing the world now starting to do a lot more positive affirmations and positive thinking and being able to transform the nature of the mind into a different way of being and using it as a device for our progress rather than something that we're a slave to.
Well, this is going to be a simple question, but I think it's always nice to get a different perspective on the amount of meditation a person needs. Is it going to be individualized to where the person is at the time, or is it going to be something that's systematic where we should do it a certain amount of time each day or week?
Look, I like the systems. It's just my nature. And then I like to have a schedule and a program and a routine. And so when I found Vedic meditation, I was like, oh, that really suits me because it's like, so once in the morning for 20 minutes, you're going to meditate. And once in the afternoon around between 2 and 5 o'clock or 2 and 7 o'clock, you've got this nice big window in the afternoon to do another meditation. And so this dipping in and dipping out is, I believe, a very important component to integrating this conscious awareness, integrating deep calm, integrating deep peace into our lives of activity. If we do like maybe 1 hour once a week, we don't have enough of that dipping to stabilize the experience of that deep transcendent calmness into our lives. There's a state called titiksha, which means we're unruffled by circumstances. And to be unruffled, to be able to witness circumstances from this nice calm place of observation rather than subjective relationship to that situation and be discombobulated and constantly thrown around in a state of stress because of world events, that I believe twice a day, usually for 20 minutes to 30 minutes. And people might think that's a lot of compromising activity and doing. But we've got to remember we're human beings, not human doings. And we need more being in our existence. And we need to reduce the amount of doing because the doing is what's causing a lot of the stress and discombobulation and disease.
Very true. I know people, they get into this habit of busy work, right? And it's something we learn in school, I think, where the teachers will give you busy work. They'll give you something to color, something to read, something to solve. And they say, okay, this is your assignment now, to be busy. And we as people now have our phones, and our phones can keep us busy doing whatever, whether it be watching social media, being on social media. We can look for it for entertainment, games, things along those lines. And so people today, they have a constant state of always doing something. There's not much reprieve where they get to sit back and relax. We can even look at the statistics and how many people have read books since they have graduated high school. And that number is every year dwindling even more. So we are in a world where people are not hungry for wisdom. They're not hungry for knowledge. They are just more interested in what's going around them, the latest trends, what's popular, versus what's going to maybe help them become more stress-free or less anxious. they just automatically have a body that's just filled with this negativity. And they just think it's a normal thing. And it is a normal thing for them. And it's not until they have a breaking point where they go, I can't do this forever. And I wish we can just say, hey, if you have this level of stress, if you have this level of anxiety, start to meditate for 20 minutes a day or, 40 minutes a day. People won't do it. People wait until it's broken. They don't take their car to the mechanic when the light's not on. They wait for the light to go on and start blinking and yelling at them saying, hey, take me in. There needs to be something done or we're going to have big problems later on. And this is all to say that if a person is to truly focus on themselves, like to say, hey, can I check in to really see if I'm doing good? Is it something where they can create a pattern where maybe every Saturday after the long week, let me check in? Or is it like every morning when they wake up, are they hitting the snooze button? Are they being like lethargic? Like, I don't want to go to work today. What is the cue to kind of help someone say it is time to focus on you?
Such an important thing. And, what you're talking a lot about there is our craving for pleasure and dopamine. And so this constant seeking of dopamine in places where we can extract it the most. So obviously TikTok and Instagram doom scrolling is where we get a lot of dopamine from ice cream, from KFC, from, drinking beer, from cocaine, we're constantly seeking pleasure, even Netflix and, everything that we're doing is trying to distract ourselves from that inward journey and that reflection, that what I call critical thinking. And so I think there's two aspects there's about 5 aspects to well-being. I'll run through them very briefly, but we'll end on the critical thinking side of things. Obviously, we need to hydrate really well. And, we need to just obviously drink really good fluids and not rely on caffeine and alcohol. We need to eat really well because that food is nutrition and, minerals and vitamins and all the things that we need for our body's well-being. We need to have really good harmonious relationships. So we can't just go and stick our head in a hole and be excluded from the world. We need to really work on cultivating harmonious relationships. We need to exercise well, and that can be cardio and physical workouts. I believe, even at 58, I go to the gym 3, 4, 5 times a week. It's so important that we look after this vehicle that we have. We need to stretch that vehicle, so that means it needs to be lithe and supple. But we need to quieten the mind, and that's where meditation comes in. So getting out of our thoughts and stop thinking and have a meditation practice that will allow us to quieten that mind beyond the process of sleep, so in a meditation experience. And the final one is exactly what you're talking about. We need to have the ability to be aware of the nature of our thoughts and just what I call critical thinking, taking time out. And it can be with a journal, a pen and a book, and write down where you're at in your life. What are you thinking about? What are you doing? But what do you want to be doing? And what do you need to think? What do you need? How do you want to see yourself? What is your perspective of who you are? And start exploring what is the future version of yourself that you're in the process of becoming. Because a lot of us don't think about who we're becoming, because you're always in the process in each moment of becoming the future version of yourself. But our previous version of ourself, the life that we've lived, shapes and forms our current version of ourselves, the way we see ourselves. And then that current version of ourselves starts shaping the future version of ourselves because we're operating from that current state, which is highly influenced by our previous version. So that's how we stay in this recurring pattern that doesn't really adapt or change. You might have been abused when you were 15 or told by your father that you were hopeless or your father abandoned you. That was the previous version of yourself, which shapes and forms the current version of yourself. And so that critical thinking becomes the mandate for what your future version of yourself is going to become, the same again. But what I'm interested in when I work with my clients is let's explore the future version of ourselves that is a blank canvas and that is not in any way, shape or form attached or identified or molded by your previous version or your current version of yourself. And that's where we get into really unlimited potential. Are you a best-selling author? Are you a filmmaker? Are you someone that lives with absolute integrity? Are you someone that is liberated from your patterns of, detrimental habits? So there's lots of things we can do to start creating. And, Joe Dispenza does a lot of work in this. And The Secret you mentioned, a lot of this was sort of around this, but a lot of that was just about getting Porsches and having nice luxury things. But it's more about how do I create a version of me that is in the future from this current moment that is a version that I have to really shape and mold and craft and create that hasn't been crafted or created yet. And so just an example of this, I wanted to write a book and I'd never written a book, but I wanted to get my message out to the world that meditation was a really powerful tool and people should use it. My vision was to inspire 1 billion people to meditate daily. And so I visualized, I didn't know if there was a bookstore in New York on any particular street, but I only knew a few streets in New York, being from Australia. I knew there was Fifth Avenue, I knew there was Broadway, I knew there was a few other streets. So I thought, well, Broadway, I know that's a big street in New York. So I thought, I'll Google if there's a bookstore in Broadway. And there was. This was a few years ago. The bookstore was called Strand Bookstore. And so visualized, first I went to Google Street View, and I saw the street frontage of that bookstore. And I envisaged and visualized me doing a signing of my book that was printed and published in Strand Bookstore, and people queuing up in the bookstore, holding my book, waiting for me to sign it at a little desk in the bookstore after doing a talk about the book. And I visualized that quite often. And I just imagined the joy of me having a book published and people wanting me to sign. I was a bit egotistical, I know. But I thought, at least I've got the book published, and this will be, you've got to get into the texture and the feeling of your future version of yourself and picture a realistic scene. Okay, that's the way it really happens. Anyway, years had passed and I produced a film called The Portal, and with the film came a book called The Portal as well. And we were doing screenings around America. And one of the screenings we did was in New York at East Village in a really cool, arty sort of cinema, art house cinema. And at the end of the film, we would sign copies of our book. Me and Jackie, the co-author, she was the director of the film. And there I was, sitting at a desk at the back of the cinema in the foyer. And there was about 40 people holding the book, waiting for me to sign it. And look, it wasn't Strand Bookstore on Broadway. I must admit, I'd missed it by about 3 kilometers. And it was a cinema, and it was me signing a book that I'd written, and there I was in New York. So this future version of yourself can become your reality, but you have to be very clear about what that future version of yourself looks like. And it's really quite amazing how so many of those things that I've explored as the future version of myself has become my reality.
I find that amazing because someone might have heard your story and said, well, it wasn't what I dreamed or dreamt. And they look at that small detail, and in their mind now, they would say, why should I even dream if my dream is not going to come exactly true the way I wish it would, right? People are very precise. They like perfect, right? I'm sure you probably heard people like to wait for the perfect opportunity or the perfect time for something. And even if they could dream, they might get close to it. You know, you were 3 kilometers from that bookstore. To them, they would still have this idea that they failed. And I remember one of my college friends, she tried meditation with me one day, and we only did about 5 minutes of it. And so we set a timer, and we just wanted to, sit and, be with ourselves and our thoughts. And after the timer went off, the first thing she said to me was, wow, I suck at that. I failed, right? It wasn't, wow, that was an interesting experience. Wow, I learned so much. It was the negative aspect to it. And I wanted to, ask as one of my final questions, the positive side to it, because we can look at the negative very easily. Like the mind loves to be negative, but the positive, like what would someone benefit from doing meditation every day or a couple times a week? What are some of the first things they would notice? Because I think that's really going to help them incentivize them to say, possibly, like, this could be a good thing for me to add into my life today.
I think firstly, we've got to start with what style or what type of meditation they're doing. It's a very difficult and very hard meditation to just sit and watch the mind, because most people are just going to have lots of thoughts and nothing's going to really change. And this was the challenge I found when I started to look into meditation, and I was chronically stressed. I had a very busy mind. I had a lot of anxiety. And so I wasn't really able to just sit and empty the mind or quieten the mind by just doing that. It needed something more. So I found transcendental meditation or Vedic meditation, which using the mantra and the repetition of that mantra really became a very easy and effortless and deep process. So I didn't have to try to empty the mind. The mantra was doing that for me. And that's just the sound that the teacher will give the student. And then they will repeat that sound very gently inside their head. And eventually to the point where that sound almost lulls the mind into what we call transcendence, where you go beyond the thinking mind and you've dropped into the field of mind because it's so profoundly blissful that the mind naturally will go into that non-thinking space. Because thoughts are charming for the mind. And that's why the mind, if you're just sitting watching the mind or trying to empty the mind's like, well, I love thoughts. Thoughts are great. And I get a lot of pleasure from thoughts. So it's not going to want to not think.
Mm-hmm.
So trying to meditate and not using a mantra, I find is very difficult. But using the mantra, what happens is it replaces the charm of thoughts with the charm of the mantra. And the mantra takes the mind deeper to eventually the greatest charm of all, which is the charm of transcendence, which we call being or presence. And it's very blissful. So that's firstly the thing I would think about is, have you got a formalized training with a teacher that's qualified with a particular methodology? And there's lots of different methodology. It doesn't have to be this pathway. There's lots of other ways to meditate. But getting clear on what is the type of meditation you're doing will definitely give you different outcomes. So if you're using something like Vedic meditation, what we tend to find is people feel, firstly, they start sleeping better because sleep, the load of sleep, what it has to do has been alleviated because the meditation has already released a lot of that stress that sleep is trying to release. So when they get to the sleep stage of their day, the stress accumulation has eased off because they've meditated twice a day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon. And now when they get to sleep, they can drop into sleep much more easily. And I had chronic insomnia because sleep wasn't able to carry that load of stress and release it because it was just too much to bear. And so I started sleeping like a log, every single night. And that's what I tend to find with a lot of my meditation students. So sleep becomes very easy and deeper. We tend to find they're less emotionally reactive and triggered. People are very easily triggered or emotionally responsive to circumstances and situations. And this is because they have a very unstable state, which means that they're not sovereign. They're not in ownership of their own particular state. Their state is at the mercy to circumstances, situations, things people say, things people do, things that are happening in the world. And people are getting so discombobulated that they end up getting highly medicated or self-medicated to try and alleviate this discombobulation. When meditation, we tend to find a lot of people go, wow, I just felt I moved through the day so fluidly, so effortlessly, without these huge emotional upheavals or reactivity to everything. It was just really beautiful for me to be in this state of calmness. So calmness is the main thing that we tend to find. And from calmness, we see people's health starting to get better. We find that the lack of well-being and health and harmony in the body is a response of too much stress or discombobulation emotionally, physically, the nervous system, the mind, too much stimulation, too much activity. So their health tends to get a lot better as well. They get more energy as well.
I remember when I was a teenager, and I was a mess. I was a mess as a teenager, where there was a lot of stuff going on in my mind. And I loved, as you said, to focus on those thoughts. It was like my favorite thing to do. And it wasn't until my early 20s where I realized that all of those thoughts were not going to help me. Even though I was in an area where most people would call me fortunate or lucky or blessed, I was looking at it as this is a prison cell and I don't want to be here too long. So I was trying to figure out, how do I get out? And I remember seeking teachers who were, well-versed in meditation and learning from them. It wasn't something I could have done by myself because, as you said, it is challenging to silence the mind when the only thing you want to do is think about thoughts. And I've been thinking about thoughts my whole teens. And it was something I wanted to continue on for the rest of my life if I could have, if I didn't give myself a focus of, let me be still for a moment. And that stillness has created so much prosperity in my life. I can only begin to expand on that, but it's important that people realize that your day is comprised of 24 hours. And I know when I ask or someone asks or they ask themselves to do something, the first thing they're going to say is that they don't have time. I don't have time for this. I'm too busy. I got my family. I got my work. I have to do this. I have to do that. And I understand that you can be busy with things. But the moment I started meditating, and it might seem in the beginning like a waste of time, it felt as if I gained a tremendous amount of time in my day where I stopped wasting it in the wrong areas and started to focus in the right areas, where now I looked at all of my day and I go, wow, look at all of this time I have available for growth, for progress, for being a better version of myself. And as I said, sure, you can try by yourself. You can watch a couple of YouTube videos, but you're going to be like my friend who just failed miserably. And it's okay to fail and to try and to do it again, but to have someone who is able to guide you, ask questions, to have those mantras, as you were saying, to really help guide you in how you're thinking, and then to talk about it after can be an experience worth its weight in gold. And today is an opportunity for you to look at all of the areas of your life, whether they be areas where you're thriving and you're truly successful, like the gentleman who sold his business for $350 million, or maybe you are $100,000 in debt and you're trying to figure out, how do I get out of that, right? We have to begin someplace. And if we can begin on the inside and figure out what needs to be placed to where, then I believe you can truly start to put things in its rightful place. And when you can move more freely, whether it be physically or mentally, the world is going to be opening up multiple different paths for you to walk on. And then from there, you can choose what goals and what successes you want to reach. And the work that you do is helping people reach that. And it's so important that they see that. If you could, Tom, can you tell us some final words, some final thoughts, something you would like to have people walk away with from our conversation today? And then please tell people how they can find you, reach out, and begin working with you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for the invitation for that. The thing I'd like to leave with everyone is that we will all have challenges. We will all have difficulties. We will all have struggles. And there's no point where we'll get to in life where there won't be some challenge, some difficulty. There's this phenomenon of polarity, where there's a pleasure-pain dynamic that we, in some way, shape, or form, wherever we're getting to, there's going to be something that will arise that will be a challenge. But the beautiful thing for us to really understand this, and this is something that it took me a while to really get, is that each one of those challenges, when it arises in our life, is an opportunity for us to go deeper, to inquire. What is this offering me? What is the opportunity in this? What is this teaching me? And sometimes it might be an external thing, like maybe I need to change my job. Maybe I need to change my partner. Maybe I need to change my wardrobe. Sometimes it's an external thing. Most of the time it's an internal thing about the way you're seeing yourself, the way you're seeing the world, the way you're eating food. Like for me, getting my cholesterol numbers, there's always an opportunity for change and adaptation. And adaptation, whether it's external or internal, is the key for living a more harmonious life. And you mentioned this before in the call, which I really love. We don't need to wait till it's a crisis. We can adapt before it becomes a crisis. And so if we can really take some time out each day of being distracted, if there is difficult times, just spend more time in that quietness of meditation, and also a little bit of time each day or each week at least in a space of critical thinking. Get your journal out and start exploring, what does that future version of yourself look like? What do you need to change in your life to make that future version of yourself become realized? And there might be some things that may not be necessarily enjoyable, like I go to the gym quite early in the morning, and it's easier and nicer for me to stay in that nice, soft, cozy bed that's all warm. But I know that my gains will be better, my life will be better overall by having a little bit of upfront discomfort by going to the gym, getting out of bed. I do lots of things like, cold showers and ice baths, and I lie on a spiky mat at night before going to sleep, which is very uncomfortable. But all these points of discomfort and depriving myself of pleasure lead to greater levels of pleasure because I'm in a better state of well-being. So that's my final message, is learn to adapt and evolve and grow. And then where they can find me to continue this conversation, if they need some support in any way, shape or form, whether it's learning to meditate, I run courses on Zoom for people around the world. I run retreats as well. I do coaching and mentoring for people on a private and personal level. So they can find me on Instagram at Tom Cronin, just Tom Cronin. And then they can also find me on my website, which is tomcronin.com.
Perfect. And I'm going to make it easy for everyone. All the links would be right down below. So whether you're looking for a retreat, individual coaching, for meditation, or just to continue the conversation of what Tom and I had today, it's going to be an eye-opening experience to see all the possibilities that are there for you. I understand sometimes our world can get so busy and so hectic where it's hard to think. It's hard to even process what you have to do next. But if you can take some time, slow down, you can see things so much more vividly. I remember there was a scene, and I just love this movie. I love this book, the Peaceful Warrior. And in the movie, there was Dan. He was on top of the bridge with his mentor. He called him Socrates. And he was so busy to get to his next thing, his practice. He had to go to practice, right? He was so worried about practice. And he's like, what are we doing here on this bridge? And he's like, just look around, take some time to see what's happening. And he looks around, he's like, there's nothing happening. And then he did something in the movie. In the book, he kind of references it a different way, but he was able to slow down and to see the people, to see the smiles, to see the bugs flying around. And you just have to ask yourself, are we able to see those little minute things? If you're a parent, are you able to see your kids running around smiling and laughing? Are you at work and you seeing your coworkers working together and having a victory at the end of the day? Are you and your partner going on a date, holding hands, looking each other's eyes and feeling what you felt as butterflies on the first time you have ever met before? All of these things are always going to be present. It's just that sometimes we get so used to the mundane, our regular day, and we don't experience all the truly blissful things. So again, meditation has been something profound in my life. It has helped me slow down. It has helped me to see the things that I would take for granted if I wasn't able to be more focused on all of the things that are happening in my life. Because there is a saying, there is never nothing going on. You just have to be able to pay attention. So pay attention to the things that you might be ignoring, that you might not be bringing focus to, because those areas of focus can bring so much more wondrous possibilities in your life. So this is all to say, reach out to Tom. The links are down below. Learn more about what he's doing, about how meditation can change your life. Tom, thank you so much for coming on, spending some time talking about your work and introducing us to some of the wonders of how meditation could change someone's life.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me along and holding space for us today and have this beautiful container to share this knowledge.